so many people all over the world have not had a chance to look through a telescope, but so many people in Kenya and Africa, much more haven't. And I think it's a gateway to inspire young people into science or just into solutions for our continent. So we decided to set up the traveling telescope. And at the time we had a smaller telescope. It wasn't that big. Unfortunately, it was stolen and we thought we'd get
that's not the one I thought you were going to say.
a bigger telescope. And we have others, but the one we have is a 12-inch reflector that is, you know, just like a celebrity. When you put it in the middle, everyone wants to come and look through. And it doesn't matter where people are coming from or what languages speak. It becomes this thing that everyone wants to look through and then look up and see what's in the skies.
This is Selam and Hello, where stories of joy and justice vibrate with the rhythm of Africa and the diaspora.
Worried anxious group of people trying to move along. Maybe one day we'll get onto something. Until then we say hold on. I know it's hard, but baby, you just got to.
Salam and hello, everyone. My name is Lilly Piper, and welcome to the show. One of the favorite things that I love about this region and coming back home and living back here in the East Africa the last 17 years has been how much of the night sky I can enjoy, much more than when I was living in Boston, which was the last city I lived in the United States. And one of the ways that I've come to really appreciate the night sky is through the work of the traveling telescope. I hope that many of you have engaged with their extraordinary work. The Traveling Telescope is an educational and an empowering organization that is introducing Kenyans left and right to the beauty of the night sky, to astronomy, to the power of the sciences. And I am just delighted today that the CEO and co-founder, Susan Murabana, is with us today. Susan and Chu, the team behind the Traveling Telescope, I had the joy of meeting many years ago. They came on board to help us do a fundraiser for an organization that my kids were involved in and were just so generous with their time and talent. They brought their planetarium. We got to sit inside this beautiful structure and get to experience the night sky close up and personal. And beyond their planetarium, they have this incredible telescope that they are taking all around the country, introducing schools and children to the wonders of astronomy and the power of the constellations. It's really extraordinary what they're doing. Susan is an astronomer, as I mentioned, and she also has played many roles in building up the science network and ecosystem here in the continent. She is the founding president of the African Planetarium Society and serves on the board of the International Planetarium Society. She was a 2020-2021 United Nations Space for Women mentor and is also on the board of the Kenyan Optical Telescope Initiative. All things in her world kind of revolve around science and the telescope. And Susan and Chu and their team have worked across Africa promoting science and education, first through Cosmos Education in the early 2000s, and then later through the Global Hands-On Universe. She's also the national coordinator for Astronomers Without Borders. Isn't that awesome? Of course, astronomy in our universe should be without borders. And that work of promoting education and advocacy around the sciences is introducing so many more of us to the beauty that is just right above our heads. In fact, the Traveling Telescope's work has been not only appreciated by myself and communities across Kenya, but has been awarded the 2020 Europlanet Prize for Public Engagement for their work. It really is incredible. And if you just quickly Google Traveling Telescope, up will pop up all these amazing images of young people engaging with science in new and vibrant ways through this telescope that comes to them in their communities. So it is my great pleasure and delight to welcome astronomer, thinker, leader, and the brilliant Susan Murabana to this show today. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you, Lily. Thank you for inviting me today.
I'm so delighted it fit into your schedule. I was laughing with the team that because the rains are here, we had a little bit more of your time. So we are just so glad that you are with us today.
Thank you.
So, Susan, for people who don't maybe know as much about the traveling telescope, let me first start by saying, how do you describe it? When people say, tell me what you do, what's your work? How do you describe the work of the traveling telescope?
So basically what we do is travel with our telescope to all these beautiful dark skies and give people a chance to look through the telescope. And why do we do it? Because I think for me, growing up, I always loved the sciences, but I did not have an attachment to it. And the first time I looked through a telescope in my 20s and looked at Saturn and this planet with rings and floating up there in space, I was like, this is what I should have learned in school. And I wanted to share that. And that was before I met Chu, my husband and partner, who also had the same experience. He wanted to share the views of the telescope with school kids, but also just members of the public. And so the idea for us is to move around and reach as many people. It's hard to get everyone to come to us. But it's easier, especially in Kenya, for us to go to underserved communities and share the views of the night sky with our telescope. And I think for us, it's also just getting a chance to explore the planet and see the beautiful skies from different places. And I'm fortunate to have experienced that through the traveling telescope expeditions.
Well, I love what you said about bringing the telescope to the people, like taking it to the people. It's like democratizing this access to the stars that maybe would not have happened had you not developed this. So let's talk about just kind of how do you conceptualize this mission of the traveling telescope? I mean, I've seen it. We're going to show some images on the screen in just a moment. It's a significant piece of equipment. So at what point did you think, oh, we can actually move around with this thing, that this thing can actually travel?
So I said I looked through a telescope in my 20s when it was in the 2000s. And I knew I wanted to do that, to share astronomy and science. And eventually I got a telescope when I was volunteering with the Global Hands-on Universe project. And it was a small telescope, but it was my telescope. It wasn't it was expensive for me at that time. It was a donation from a local company. And then fast forward in 2013, there was a total solar eclipse, and the path of totality was going through northern Kenya, a place called Turkana, which is dry and good for the night skies. And I talked to members of my Rotary Club. I'm a member of the Rotary Club, and asked them if we could do a trip there and, raise funds for the community there. And we had a really brilliant website, and Chu happened to come along for this trip. And he was filming me because I'd received 5,000 safe solar glasses to distribute to schools and to make sure that the young kids would experience looking through the telescope, looking at the sun safely. And I got to know him and I got to learn about what he was doing in the UK. He's a filmmaker and he was also doing outreach. And he had thought of, traveling around with the telescope and coming up with the traveling telescope. And so when we decided we wanted to be together, we thought this is a brilliant place to have the project because so many people all over the world have not had a chance to look through a telescope, but so many people in Kenya and Africa, much more haven't. And I think it's a gateway to inspire young people into science or just into solutions for our continent. So we decided to set up the traveling telescope. And at the time we had a smaller telescope. It wasn't that big. Unfortunately, it was stolen and we thought we'd get
that's not the one I thought you were going to say.
A bigger telescope. And we have others, but the one we have is a 12-inch reflector that is, just like a celebrity. When you put it in the middle, everyone wants to come and look through. And it doesn't matter where people are coming from or what languages speak. It becomes this thing that everyone wants to look through and then look up and see what's in the sky. So the idea of moving around with the equipment we have started with that. And it just made sense to have it as a telescope we travel with, and it's easy to talk about. So it's easy to know what we do from the name, the traveling telescope.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, we also have a mobile planetarium that we also move around with.
Which is fun.
And both of them, I think the planetarium is, a simulation of the night sky. It's immersive experience. And when kids or adults come in, you feel like you're actually driving or traveling through space. And so we can do a lot in the planetarium, move forward in time, back in time, zoom into objects that we can't do with the telescope. But with the telescope, you're looking at the real thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we then set up the traveling telescope in 2014. So next year we'll be celebrating 10 years
Fantastic.
since our adventure.
Fantastic. Oh, your baby's going to turn 10 years old.
Yeah.
The first fruit of your partnership. That's really amazing. I really just love the imagination that comes to this idea, the fact that I love science, you love science, but how can we spread that out? And the fact that you thought to travel around with a piece of equipment that when I look at it, I see something that's fragile, something that is expensive, that, you shouldn't move around a lot, right? Like all of us grew up in households probably where, you're not allowed to touch certain things for fear of it breaking. So a telescope, that is just beautiful to me that you thought this is no good to us in one place. We should move around with it. So as you started to introduce this work into communities and work with schools, I'm curious to think about how you created your programs that would both build on the curiosity of young people, but then also create a deeper understanding of the sciences. How do you make use of that time when you bring a telescope and you've got maybe 30 minutes with kids or an hour? How do you go from the curiosity to like a deeper understanding of what they're looking at?
Let me just take you back a little bit
Sure.
to the sensitivity of the equipment we have. So both the telescope and planetarium are very sensitive. And I know you've been to huge parts of Kenya, and you know how bad the roads can be.
Yeah.
So it's fragile, and we have to, like, when we bought the telescope, we had to build a box at Ngong Road, where they have the Juakali guys making to build something that would hold it safe.
Yeah.
And every time we get it out, we are like, oh my God, I hope we it's something. It's like a baby, you carry it safely, and you want to make sure everything is done well. And I always joke that I'm glad I have you and other gentlemen in our team to carry the heavy stuff. I do carry it sometimes, but it's
heavy.
It's part of the process and part of the fun, just setting it up and everything. And that bulky heavy stuff also, I think, and it's a different thing to bring to a school. So come back to your question about how we decided to set up our programs. So I didn't experience this in school, and neither did you. And I think looking through the telescope or visiting a planetarium, for me, I had this need to want to share with others, share with my family and friends and kids, for some reason, just children in schools. I think because I was reminded of how school was for me when I was younger, and how we studied. And going to school was a natural thing for us. So we knew it had to be a night thing. But we also have tried to get kids to look at the telescope during the day and see the sun. We find that it's just one star, while at night you can look at much more. And so we had to talk to the schools, and funnily enough, the interest was there. I remember the very first school we went to outside Nairobi in Western, even before the traveling telescope was registered. I called a friend of mine whose dad had just retired. He was a teacher, and I was like, "Oh, come over." And we went with our small telescope. At that time, we had a smaller telescope. And when we got to the school, I kid you not, more than 1,000 kids waiting, like on the balcony and everywhere, waiting to look through the telescope. Wow. And we had this tiny thing, and it was intimidating because they're like, how are we going to get all these anxious boys? It was an all-boys school to look through. And unfortunately, it rained on that particular night. But that was the night we realized that there's interest, there's a need, and there's interest in the community we want to visit. And so we wrote a proposal. There's a call for proposal to the International Astronomical Union, Office for Astronomy for Development, a bit of a mouthful.
Oh my goodness.
and we wrote a proposal to propose to visit. At that time, we wanted to go to 40 schools in a month, reaching
40
around
schools in 1 month. Okay, I'm like doing the math. Okay.
And we did it. We went to schools morning, afternoon, and to 200, 300, 400, 500 kids around it. We realized we need to have a boundary, a nice red light around the telescope so that it's dark. You don't want people hitting the telescope. We needed to protect ourselves and our equipment, but also the children. And the interest was there. And I think for me, the telescope is a tool to get people to look up, and especially for kids, because that's a whole observatory up there. It's a whole science laboratory up there, like a place that you can question and find out and look for answers, wondering what that star is, how far it is, what theory is this. It all began with, just having the equipment there. And then the planetarium was easier because we would reach out to schools and say, we'd set it up during the day, and your students will miss their science lesson and have a 40-minute science lesson in the planetarium and go back to class. And so that worked, and it's continued. We've continued visiting schools. Now hundreds of schools, hundreds of thousands of kids. And we managed to visit 30 schools that month.
Well done.
In 2014.
Amazing.
But that jump-started the project.
I'm curious to know what kids' reactions are like. Is there, there must be some that stick out in your mind of what kids have said or they experienced. Tell us a little bit about what those reactions are like.
So just to point out, we go to all schools. We go to underserved schools, which we don't charge. We don't charge government schools. I think that's where we feel the impact. I mean, there are more numbers, so the impact could be bigger. And then we visit private and international schools for a minimum fee just to keep our project going. And we've had the same reaction irrespective of where these kids come from. Mostly it's wow. and Chu, who's also a sound man, we've always regretted not having equipment to record these reactions, because it's just very excited, and sometimes there's no verbal reaction, but there's the look on the kids' face, especially when we go to really rural schools. You can just see that look of, this is a chance of a lifetime and I'm enjoying it. And then there's often when people look through the telescope and look up at the object, like if it's the moon, they're really comparing what they're looking at, or a planet like Saturn or Jupiter. So mostly we get wows, oh my God, and giggles, and it's just so fulfilling for us. It's life-changing. I think for me, I've appreciated those trips in areas. One thing I remember was we once went to a school in eastern part of Kenya. It was a remote school. And one of the kids visited the planetarium, and when he got out, he was like, I now believe in science. I thought scientists used to lie. And it was just, showing them what could be out there.
Well, seeing is believing. That's so beautiful. I'm just thinking about how those kids must have gone home, and I'm imagining what the dinner time conversations would have been with mom and dad that day, because I'm thinking, when did I ever look through a telescope? I think it was university when I took a physics class, and it was required as a part of the lab to go. But just getting to see that up close. I mean, it is magical, and it is once in a lifetime, especially for those young learners. I'm curious, when you go to these communities, particularly because they can range, I'm sure, from the urban to then the rural. I'm sure you see it's more clear, isn't it, in the rural areas, what you can see just because of the, what's it called, the pollution, the air pollution?
The light pollution.
I'm curious if you're able to weave, indigenous stories around the stars, around constellations, or cultural perspectives into that engagement with young people.
I love the idea of cultural stories around the sky, because that's what got me really interested in. Yes, I looked through a telescope and I was interested, but the fact that I learned that our ancestors also looked up and wondered and tried to make sense of it and connect us to the sky, that is interesting. However, when we go for our trips, it's so intense, especially before COVID. You have 500 kids around your very sensitive equipment, and they're kicking dust and all that, and they're excited. So, and it's at night. So you're really in that moment of being with them. I remember there's a school we went to in Amboseli, And there was a project where the parents and the grandparents and the kids were all in the school, and they all came to look through the telescope. And so that area is predominantly Maasai community, and I invited the elders to talk about traditional sky knowledge, and they did talk about it. And we have a mic normally when we are there with our sound thing, and the kids, the elders talked about the traditional sky knowledge for them in that community, and it was so powerful to have that. We did not record it as we wish we did, but the fact that we're losing these traditional stories, we don't have, we don't know whether they've been recorded and how we can access them, and we don't have a culture of sitting down and talking about these stories of the sky with our children. I don't know my traditional stories from my community, but there are communities in Kenya like the Samburu, which we've had have a connection and have some stories with the night sky. And we hope, maybe not the traveling telescope, but there'll be a community of astronomers or astronomy communicators within the country will collect these stories and, put them in a book or a movie or something so that we can preserve them.
I think we could do a mashup, Selam and Hello and Traveling Telescope. That's what I'm hearing. I feel like we should take this whole thing on the road.
Yeah, sure.
You do the telescope part, I'll do the talking part, and we make something happen.
Yeah, sure. So other than what we do with education, we also do astrotourism. And I think that was one of the things we saw as a gap and a way to make revenue for our traveling telescope project. And we've partnered with lodges and go to all these beautiful places and offer astronomy nights, what we call the star safari. So we give you a guided tour of the night sky as you look through the telescope. And we've gone to Samburu, as I said, and some of the guides who are locals from that community, dressed in their very colorful regalia, have talked about things in the sky. So that would be really cool to collect those stories with the, images of the people, because it's the people, the stories and the place. I think that's really
beautiful.
Could create a really beautiful story around that.
Now that you're reaching the 10-year mark, I'm sure it will be very soon that you'll start to have those people first come, alumni of your of your program come and say, I'm actually taking this route because of that inspiration. All those thousands of kids at this point. Do you know how many kids you've worked with at this point?
I think close to 500,000.
Wow. Congratulations. That's incredible.
I visited or looked through the telescope. I visited our planetarium or looked through the telescope.
That's amazing, Susan. Wow. Congratulations. And thank you for contributing that. I'm just thinking 500,000 young people whose imagination is bigger now because of that. But when you are throughout this work and I'm sure that when you engage with a school, there's much appreciation for your work. I'm wondering though, if there are also challenges though in promoting this kind of science education. And if there are, what are some of the barriers you're seeing to your work?
I don't think we've reached, the number of schools that we have in the country and the places, even Nairobi, like we've still not reached a good number of people. And it's because we are a small team. Our equipment is not readily available on the shelves here. And obviously bringing something in is expensive because you have to pay taxes. If anything breaks, it's again not something you can find in the country. So that's obviously a challenge. So access to more schools, especially underserved schools, we still want to reach more schools and work with them. Our team is small and we've kept it small because we're still not like a big company able to employ very many people, and there are not very many astrophysicists or people interested in astronomy outreach that we can reach out to. And then just obviously accessing some of these places, the roads are crazy, the drive is crazy. Half the time I don't have to do the driving, but it's exhausting to drive the whole day and then have to do the show in the evening. So those are some of the challenges. And we honestly feel as a traveling telescope, Chu and I, that it would be awesome if every child, at least once in their life, gets a chance to look through the telescope or visit a planetarium. I think at least once. And if you can somehow get close to that, that would be really, really cool.
Well, and I'm curious, if not through the traveling telescope, are there other places where people in Kenya can actually look through a telescope or experience a planetarium currently?
We've again, through the traveling telescope, we've built a permanent planetarium. It's built out of bamboo. So it's the only bamboo planetarium in the world. And it was, you have a problem and you're trying to figure out how to solve it. To buy a dome or something is really expensive as well. And so we moved into this place that had this bamboo, and I didn't think of it, but she was like, we're going to build a bamboo planetarium. And I was like, really? But yeah, we built it and it's
Amazing.
up and we're able to get people in. So that's one place.
And where is that in Nairobi?
Yeah, in Nairobi
Okay.
at Riverside Drive in Nairobi. It's the only fixed planetarium in the city. And it's something we want to replicate or share with other underserved countries who are interested in low cost planetarium buildings. But also it's a good way to protect our planet. Using bamboo is good for the planet rather than using steel and all these other materials we'd have used. But there are other organizations that also do astronomy outreach. There's Amateur Astronomical Society of Kenya. There's Leo Planetarium. So there are other small organizations. We don't have a fixed an observatory in the country yet. I know you talked about Kenya Optical Telescope Initiative. There are plans to get a big telescope in the country, mostly for research.
Okay.
And then there's a telescope in Turkana Basin Institute, which is also for research, which is in partnership with other universities in the UK. So at the moment, there's not many options, obviously, but I'm sure like 10 years ago now, the climate has really changed, and I'm looking forward to the next 10 years to see what will happen. I'm sure there'll be a permanent, there'll be an observatory somewhere in some corner of the country where people can go to.
Well, we will definitely link in our show notes all the places you've mentioned so people can find your work, engage with it. I think I now that you're saying, I'm like embarrassed that I didn't remember that you had the planetarium in Riverside. So I'm going to take all of people here with the little ones, especially, to go check that out, because it's so special to be able to see something that is your own as well. I think that's quite important to see Kenyans creating these spaces for the country. Why do you think, Susan, it matters that it is, why does it matter? We have so many things competing for our attention, right? We have health issues, we have infrastructure, we have democracy issues and government issues. When people are trying to figure out what to do with their time, attention, or even where to put, their support, why does it matter that we have our own African investments in astronomy and into the sky?
That's a good question that I need to think hard about. But I think if you look at any country that has invested in space exploration, you can see how much they've developed. It's not just about going out there. It's also investing in the people who work on the projects in the country. If you look at what it takes to take an astronaut to space, you need a whole team that will, build the rockets and do the science and everything to get this one person, and they're paid here, and they contribute also to the solutions of other problems, like solar energy, for example, would not have been used if it wasn't for space exploration. If you look at our phones, and they have cameras, charged couple devices, we take selfies and photos with them. That would not have happened if it wasn't for space exploration, having telescopes in space that would be able to take photos. It was too expensive to use the old film cameras, and that's why the charged couple or the new tech was invented. So there's so many practical uses, including satellite imagery. We're able to know when we're going to expect heavy rain or no rainfall and warn our farmers or get them to take insurance. There's so many applications from space exploration, but also just inspiration. I know I've been around a few astronauts, including Dr. Mae Jemison, and I know how inspiring it is for me as an adult, but you can imagine what it is for young kids. And we need to constantly inspire our next generation of leaders to make, things better, to make life better. And I've also been fortunate to talk to some of the astronauts, and most of them say while they're going out, they look for their country. And then once they're up there in space, they look at the planet and they realize this is our home and we need to take care of it. So I think also looking up with our telescopes reminds us of how fragile our planet is. And really, we need to, come together and collectively create solutions that would make our planet better, at least for the next generation of
That's really powerful and beautifully woven from the practical everyday innovations we need in mobile technology and beyond in sciences to this very long-term challenge we have of taking care of this place. I really appreciate your thoughts on that and why it matters that we look up and that we engage with science in these ways that you are. So looking ahead, how is this project going to sustain? When you mentioned the next 10 years, you must have big dreams. So maybe I'll break it up into two buckets. What are your dreams for the next 10 years of your work? And how do you see that work sustaining? What do you need to reach those goals?
That's a really good question. I'm not like a 10-year kind of planner.
Okay, 2 years.
I'm not a 10-year kind of planner. I'm not, but yeah, I've been put into a place where I didn't think I'd be running a company, exploring space and all that. And I hope that we are able to, as I said, get as many kids and partner with other organizations to realize our dream of visiting as many places. Every county, more systematic approach to visiting schools and things like that. And obviously that means a few proposal writings and, putting ourselves out there, but also, really getting our government to appreciate the wealth we have with the sky, through the tourism, Ministry of Tourism, if they can, understand what it means to have these beautiful dark skies right at the equator.
Yes.
And you know what that means? It means that when you're looking at things that are overhead, it's so crisp, clear, but it's also a nice way to sell the country, to show the beautiful dark skies to all our tourists. And I think getting more buy-in, getting more appreciation as Kenyans for this wealth we have. It's something I'd like to see. Sorry, I don't have the big, and hopefully we'll build an observatory for the public. That's something we've always wanted to do. Hopefully on a hill.
Yes, there's a few hills in this country.
A few hills. Hopefully on a hill. So just to get more people to spend more time and look up and appreciate the night sky and hopefully see the next dreamers up there. Hopefully get an astronaut from the country.
Hey, that's big. I like that. Yeah.
It's not gonna be me. I'm done. But hopefully we get to see someone from Kenya going to space. Kenya has a history of space exploration. The first X-ray satellite was launched in Malindi. Hopefully we can again become leaders in exploration, at least in Eastern Africa. We now have a space agency, the Kenya Space Agency, and they're doing a lot in terms of space exploration and awareness. So there's a lot that's happening, and hopefully in the next 10 years, there'll be much more, including someone in space.
Well, I can't resist the cliche to say, but the sky is the limit, truly. Anything is possible. While you say you may not be a forecaster, you have really put some inspiration in our minds today, just thinking about what is possible to build on both the legacy of innovation that Kenya has had and now with some new initiatives. Really seems like from tourism to landing on the moon or elsewhere, anything is possible. So if you had to conceptualize, what you want the legacy of the traveling telescope to be, on Africa's scientific landscape, what would you want your legacy to be?
I feel privileged sometimes. I know I've grown up in a space where I wasn't considered not to be able to do things because I'm a girl and everything. And I know that's not the situation for every young girl in Kenya. and sometimes boys. And I hope that through education, through what we do, we are able to invite young people, irrespective of where they're from, to be part of the space industry, whether they want to go to space or want to build rockets that would be used to go to space. I hope that we can have a really growing space industry in the country, and hopefully, that could be our legacy as a traveling telescope.
I think that would be tremendous. And I want to ask you this. I wanted to ask you it earlier, but I skimmed over it. Can you talk a little bit about what it's been for you being a woman in a very science field that is often dominated by men? What have your experiences been like?
It's weird. I don't know. I think it's upbringing. So I am number 5 of 4 boys and 2 girls.
Oh, wow.
Now 2 women and 4 men. And growing up, I never felt limited, So, half the time I'm not fixated on, I'm the only woman in the room. I'm the only, woman of color in the room or stuff like that. But with time, I've gotten more aware, and I think there's an appreciation of upbringing. My parents, like now, I'm more aware that they brought us up in a way that we were not limited to what we can do, and I appreciate that. When we do our program, so I think I forgot to talk about our partnership with Airbus Foundation. We do a robotics program in schools and underserved schools, and we're very aware of how many girls and boys we reach. I try not to limit our programs to girls or to boys, just because I feel like you've not looked through a telescope, it doesn't matter.
Yes.
But we are more aware that we'd like to give as many girls an equal opportunity as we do boys. And that's something I'm more aware of now. But growing up and for a good part of my life, it just never clicked. And in a way, it's nice not to live that way, like always looking at your back and seeing who's there around me. But in a way, it's good to be aware of the differences that our society has.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that if you haven't looked through a telescope, you just haven't looked. So just making that available.
When I was invited to run the Global Hands on Universe program, I was asked to go to an all-girls school, and I was like, perfect, Kenya High School. And I was just like, no, I really need to get the boys as well. And I went to Nairobi School. And sometimes we had projects together and sometimes separately. But it was just really nice to be able to have access to both the boys and the girls and all of them. It didn't matter. And that was more than 10 years ago, gosh. It just didn't matter. Yeah. They just hadn't had an experience of astronomy or space science, and they just wanted to learn. So, yeah.
Well, how fortunate they were and that we are to have your work and the work of the Traveling Telescope as a resource. I think as a parent, all of my kids have had a chance to go be a part of the planetarium, which has been so enriching for them and inspiring. So thank you, Susan, for your work. And I can't wait to see what the next 10 years bring, in addition to a Selam Safari of the Sky. That's just on the spot name there. But before we let you go, we ask all of our guests 2 questions because we like to see the through line that unites people despite, their field of discipline. So Susan, what is your favorite beverage or drink of choice?
I like my black tea with lemon in the morning, and then I like my red wine.
At night.
At
black
night,
tea
not in the morning.
I like, yes. Okay. Yeah. And, before we let you go, our show is all about joy and justice. So tell us, what's bringing you joy today?
Sunshine. It's a star.
Yes. I love that. The sun because it's a star. That's awesome. Susan, thank you for being on Selam and Hello today. I'm so thrilled that we had this time with you.
And thanks for having me, Lilly.
Such a pleasure.
Okay.
So listeners, I hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something. We are going to put all the ways that you can find the traveling telescope in the show notes. They're very active on social, so you can follow them, where they're going to be, and what opportunities you will have to engage with them, including their planetarium and all of their school programs. So we'll make sure you have all that information and reach out. Let us know what you thought, what inspired you from this conversation. It's at Selam and Hello on TikTok and on Instagram and on YouTube. You find us on all of those platforms. So until we see you next time, Safari Salama. Safari Sky Salama. It's peace.
I know it's hard, but baby, you just got to hold on. I know it's hard, but baby, you just got to